everyone? Welcome back to this week's episode of Outside the Arena. I'm Griffin, joined alongside me is my co-host Devin Bernstein, and today is all NBA, the NBA playoffs now in the conference semifinals, and I mean these playoffs have been awesome, so fun to watch. This time of the year is just always so fun. The NHL playoffs, which I've been rooting for the Rangers and don't know too much about hockey, but it's always, I think the NHL playoffs actually might be the best playoffs in sports, arguably. I mean, it is so competitive, so fast paced, so fun to watch. But the NBA this year has been incredible as well. We're going to break down all the latest, and we're going to go kind of back in time a little bit. Obviously, if you are friends of ours or watch the pod, Dev is a big Sixers fan. So, tough series. Obviously, they fell in six. That game five was, I mean, one of the crazier endings to a basketball game I think I've ever seen, with Tyrese Maxey scoring 7 points at the end of regulation in like 15 seconds. Dev, obviously, tough end to the season. Your thoughts on, the series, the season, and kind of where from here the Sixers should go?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of different ways you can look at the season for the Sixers. I mean, the first of which being they traded their second best player um at the very beginning of the season. So to expect anything major would have been a bit unfair in a way. But at the same time, I do think this is probably the best supporting cast that's been around Embiid in his career. Um, and with a guy like Embiid, like you don't want to waste a year of his prime. And granted, he wasn't completely healthy by the end, but I think Embiid was playing well enough to where a loss like that does hurt. Um, but I will say this, I think this was Embiid's best playoff series by like a very, very healthy margin. Completely dominated on the defensive end, was really the Sixers' only hope on the defensive end or on the glass. The team was an absolute joke when he sat for the very short amount of time he sat, and it was like, game four, he played the whole second half, and that seemed like a mistake, but if they took him out for 2 minutes, it might have been too late to even put in a fully rested Embiid. So, it's hard to say whether that was a wrong or right decision, but obviously the reliance on Embiid is a bit of an issue. But ultimately, you look at this team and it's like, I think the coach is very solid. I trust Nurse to make the right moves in a playoff series. I think Maxey is going to be a great second option for years to come. And this team has the flexibility to really make any type of move they want. So, on one hand, it is really frustrating, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't have, some expectation for this team to be better next year. And, you kind of look at what this team really needs. It's some, individually you'd like some more rebounding. But besides that, you really want your third star, your closer, your wing who can guard the other team's best player, in a pinch or whatever it may be. And it seems like a lot of the stars that have circling rumors around them, be it Jimmy Butler, Kevin Durant, Paul George, LeBron James, which I will add is, of course, very unlikely. I mean, all of those moves are individually, but, you know, this is the NBA. It seems like every offseason, some guys we don't expect to ever be moved get moved. And it seems like the Sixers, with their cap space and draft picks and roster right now, might be the best positioned team to trade for any star that becomes available. Um, or sign one if a LeBron or Paul George hits free agency. So there are a lot of options here. I would say the one concern I have is if you really commit a lot of cap space to one guy, the roster will basically just be Maxey, whoever you sign, and Embiid, which is a great foundation, but you will basically have to figure out the rest of the roster on minimums and maybe a $10 million mid-level exception. Um, so that'll be tough. And, we saw it with the Suns, this year. We've seen it in the modern NBA. You know, it's to me, it's a combination of, it can be a lot of things to different people, but it's a combination of how close the talent is at the top nowadays and how many good players there are. Just seems like you just can't be, only have three good players and then you're just figuring out the rest on minimum contracts. of course, you can sign a guy who ends up, outperforming that contract, but you can't really rely on your fourth and fifth starters to be just, kind of random minimum type pickups because there's a reason that guy is going to be on the minimum. So, I would say I have a little bit of worry about trying to find the middle ground of getting a very legit third piece and keeping together a solid rest of the roster. But ultimately, I'm very optimistic. I think Embiid's passing, you saw it in game 5 where he could not hit the broadside of a barn. And that's the type of game historically that Embiid just kind of fades out of. He has all these turnovers and he had a lot of turnovers that game, but the passing has really given him another element that when his shot's not going down or he's hurt or he's tired or whatever it may be, he can continue to make the right play and get his teammates set up, which, was huge in that game. So I'm much more confident about his, playoff issues now, especially given he played through, multiple injuries, one of which being, one no one really expected him to return from at his own level. And I think ultimately he did. And I mean, I just don't want to hear it anymore about Embiid being, some playoff like, folder. Like, I don't know anyone in the NBA that would have looked like some great player if their second option their whole career had been Ben Simmons and James Harden and their coaches had been Brett Brown and Doc Rivers. Like, I mean, seriously, like those are probably like two of the worst, coaches that have, really been around the NBA in the last decade. And two of the most untrustworthy stars, especially in the playoffs of the last decade. So, I mean, I really don't blame Embiid much for that. I think Maxey showed that he's more than a capable number 2 and is probably a top 20 to 30 player in the league. Um, so yeah, I mean, I'm very optimistic that, be it a great, surrounding cast of role players or a third star like a Jimmy Butler or whatever it may be, some combination of the two. I'm very confident that this team is going to be very good next year, and I'm excited for the Sixers going forward. I really am. And I'm just happy it feels like this is the first offseason in a while where the Sixers haven't had some like major pressing issue or drama that they really need to figure out. So I'm excited for that as well. Yeah, I mean, obviously the game 5 was ridiculous.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, people will do this where they're like, oh, it's over, kind of trying to reverse jinx their team. And I definitely have done that in the past, but truthfully, I texted my friends, was like, okay, this series is over. Like they're up 5 with, 29 seconds left, or was it 6? It was 6, right? I think it was 6.
Uh,
It
yeah.
was, yeah, it was 6. So they're up 6 with like 30 seconds left. So yeah, I mean, that game is over basically. Just ridiculous. I'll never forget that moment, even though, they lost that series. That's awesome. Um, yeah, I mean, the half court shot, just incredible, incredible stuff. Um, yeah, I mean, the Knicks are just a great team. They, you just can see how, even the first round has really changed over the last 5 years. It used to be a thing where maybe you got 2 or 3 good series, but for the most part, it's just like kind of finding out who the really good teams are and who the kind of not so good teams are. But basically, besides the 1-8 matchups, and even those were relatively competitive, at times at least. Basically, all these series was like both of these teams were throwing everything at the wall, 40 plus minutes for their main guys. Um, I just love the intensity. Feels like a different sport, like we say it off
Yeah.
air, it's true though. Like, I mean, it's just like the level of intensity. And, I would say the regular season's a marathon and then the playoffs is really a sprint, but at a marathon distance.
Yeah.
And, it's just a question of like who can just keep going and going and going. And, I think we saw that in the Sixers Knicks series, like we talked about, where Brunson just kept on, scoring. He had a horrible first 2 games from the field, but he just said, this team is not going to win without me being, super aggressive. And he just has been killing it. And he has, I think, 4 straight 40-point games in the playoffs, which is ridiculous. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think you even saw it in the Cavs Magic series where, it looked over for the Cavs at a point in game 7. And Donovan Mitchell just said, we're not losing this game. And he just, like I said, like just keeps on making shots, keeps on driving. And I mean, I will say this, I find it very interesting to see how how the Titanic sinks, so to speak. You know, like, in a game 7 situation, you need a comeback, whatever it is. Who are your trusted 5 guys? Because that's really going to show what the team is going to want to do in the offseason and where they think their weaknesses and strengths are. Um, and you saw with the Cavs, and obviously they were missing Jared Allen, but you got a lot of Tristan Thompson minutes in that game 7. Darius Garland kind of came out right as they went on that big run. Marcus Morris, I believe, did he? No, I don't think he
He
started game
started game
seven, but
6, I think. I think they went back to
yeah,
Okoro. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, it's just, and I don't think any of those are necessarily bad moves. I just find it interesting that a Mobley is really struggling to find his place right now. A Garland is especially struggling to find his place right now, and unless the Cavs really challenge the Celtics, which I would doubt here, I'd I'd imagine, if you can hear my dogs barking, I apologize. This is
I can't
ridiculous.
hear him, so that's good.
Okay. But assuming that doesn't happen, I'd imagine that the Cavs are going to say we either got to make sure we're bringing Donovan Mitchell back or get rid of him and get assets back for him, because you can't just lose a guy like Donovan Mitchell for nothing after trading all that for him. Um, so you're either going to say, let's put the best team around him we can and try to get him to re-sign, or you're going to trade Donovan Mitchell. And I think with how these playoffs have looked, it's like, it almost feels like the right move would be to try to build the best team you can for right now around Mitchell, because I think Mitchell and Allen are 2 great pieces of a contending team right now. And if you could put, Garland in a package, and then Mobley in a package along with, Levert's money or whatever it may be, I think you could get potentially 2 star level players or whatever it may be. I really think you could build a very good team here. So I think that's a move. But then there's also like, hey, these guys are really young. They're going to figure it out. Let's trade Mitchell, kind of recoup our assets, find out, who's really going to stick and who's not. Before, kind of forcing yourself to make that decision too early. Um, but yeah, I mean, we can talk about, obviously the Magic, very impressive series for them. I don't think anyone expected them to win, going into it. I guess people did expect them to, maybe challenge and make it a good series, but I don't think anyone was like, oh, what's going to happen if the Magic don't win this series? Like, Paolo was the first pick, in 2022. Like,
No.
they have a lot of time to go here. Obviously ahead of schedule. I do feel like in the NBA, if you're, quote unquote ahead of schedule, that ends up kind of holding true a little bit more than in the NFL, where I feel like if a young team is good, especially with a young quarterback, it's like, I'm like, okay, we got to win while they're on that rookie contract. Whereas in the NBA, I'm like, okay, the Magic will be fine. They're just going to keep getting better and better. Um, but Paolo obviously had a great series scoring wise, but it's very interesting because he averaged like 6 turnovers a game. So, truthfully, I didn't watch nearly as much of this series as I did every other series, but I'm interested. Obviously, his first playoffs, but he scored like a superstar, but
Yeah.
had some major ball handling issues. So that's going to be interesting to see. Obviously, Franz Wagner had a really tough game 7, and obviously this team is so desperate for shooting. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't have too much to say about the Magic. I think they'll continue to get better, and again, no one is like, uh-oh, where did the Magic go from here? Like, no
Yeah.
one thought they'd even, really make the playoffs, maybe not even the play-in. So yeah, I mean, good season for them regardless. Obviously sucks to lose any game 7 where you're up by that much. I believe it was the biggest
Yeah, the
game.
biggest game 7 comeback ever. Crazy.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I would say that's all I've got there. Um, in terms of the West, I think the Suns might be the last team to try to really build their team that way, both in terms
Mhm.
of such a top heavy roster and having your top guys not really complement each other that well. It just, you can get away with it, maybe 12 years ago when you put together 3 of the top 8 players on the planet or whatever it may be. But now it's like, I mean, first of all, there are just more guys who can score at the level of a Bradley Beal or even a Devin Booker. There are just more guys at that level nowadays. Um, so where Beal, even the level he is right now, might have been, the 40th best player in 2014. He's probably like the 70th best player now.
Yeah.
Um, but on top of that, it's just like you can't just run through the NBA because you've got guys who can get buckets. Like it's so deep, it's so much deeper than that now. You have to be locked in on defense. You have to have, an answer for everything offensively and defensively. And they just felt so outmatched. And obviously the Timberwolves are showing that they're probably better than the public thought they were initially, but I don't even know where the Suns go from here. I mean, truthfully, if I was in charge, I'd be doing anything I can to either try to start a rebuild somehow with some assets or try to reshift how this team is built because I just don't think KD, Booker, and Beal make sense together. Um, we'll talk more about Nuggets, Timberwolves, and stuff like that. But obviously, super impressed with the Timberwolves. Edwards has been great. The defense has been great. Cat even has been great when he's stayed out of foul trouble, which has been huge for them. Um, and then the Nuggets again. We'll talk more about them. I guess Do you want to talk about that game last night now, or do you want to?
The Nuggets game.
Yeah,
Let me. I got one quick thought on some of the
yeah.
games.
Go
We
ahead.
will go to the current round. Going back to the Sixers, I agree with a lot of what you said. I think it's probably, I think we're so used to at this point, the during the LeBron Cavs era and the Warriors era, it was just like this super team era where it's like get as many superstars as you can on one team and you'll be good. And like that's the key. And it's like, there was that phase, but the reason also those two teams were so good is because they had solid supporting casts, like the Warriors, like Iguodala was always there, who I know, is always a meme. And like, they had those pieces, the Sean Livingstons that, could get a bucket when you needed it. And, the Cavs had guys like Dellavedova who, the J.R. Smiths who really helped them out. And I think, yeah, like you said, like teams like the Suns have just run into trouble with, all they have is their superstars. And so I think for Philly, the best move forward is probably to try and build more of their surrounding cast, almost like the team that beat them, the Knicks. Like I think the Knicks have done an incredible job where, and I'd be really interested to see how they would be playing with Julius Randle in the lineup because I feel like it almost has helped them a little bit. I think their chemistry on floor right now with the three Villanova guys, with Anunoby and Hardenstein, it just is unmatched. I mean, these guys play so hard, play so fast. I mean, they are so tough to stop. And Jalen Brunson obviously has become a superstar before our eyes this season. And the rest of their players there are just really solid players who get the job done. Like DiVincenzo had a huge shot last night in that Pacers game, had a big game six against Philly. Like, and Josh Hart, I mean, this guy's an offensive rebound magnet and it'll be a great player on both sides. Like they just have all these guys that can get the job done. And you've got the superstar in Brunson that you'll lean on, absolutely on the offensive end. But, I think that's the key is just, with especially when Philly's got, guys like Embiid and Maxey who have proven to be such big scorers, bringing in a third guy like that, like a James Harden almost, I just don't think it works for what they have, and I think it actually deteriorate them. So I think moving forward, you got to go out and build, the rest of that roster, get some guys in who can, be tough matchups for other teams defensively, get some guys in who can shoot the ball and, build from there. Because I think, the Tobias contract's off the books, right?
Hmm.
So that's going to free them up a lot. And I think they need to take advantage of that and not go superstar hunting because we've seen how that's kind of started to work out. And, obviously, we talked about the Suns, they're a team right now where it's like, it's just a mess. Like, what do you even do there? Because, yeah, Booker and KD and Beal, like these guys, this team still should be competitive, but like, are they going to win a championship? It's tough to say. And obviously, no one's going to trade for Bradley Beal. Like that contract is just dead money at this point. KD, I think is the guy who makes the most sense if you're going to trade someone, which is funny to think about. But D Book might be a guy who asks out. I mean, there's a lot of rumors about him and New York and who knows what's going to happen. But then it's also like I think of that and I'm like, well, the Knicks have something so great going on right now. It's
Hmm.
like you trade Devin Booker, you're going to be trading from some of these pieces and then breaking that up, and it's like, does that even make sense? It's a very interesting spot for all these teams weighing the balance of superstars versus really, really good role players. And, we're seeing the value, I feel like, in these playoffs of what really good role players can do. The Boston Celtics, one of the best teams, arguably maybe the best team in the NBA right now. Derek White's a guy who's really emerged and has been a key piece for them. And, they've leaned on him heavily on the offensive end this year in the playoffs. So, it's interesting. I think the era of the super team, I think, is kind of over. And the teams that are still kind of relying on that, the Clippers even a little bit, they're going out in the first round, and it's just proven to not be working. So it's super interesting, the NBA. I mean, the first round, like you said, was really competitive. The Magic, like you mentioned, a really good young team, and it's going to be interesting to see. I think we can move on to the current round of games, and I mean, we'll start off. Obviously, the Timberwolves Nuggets already two games in that series, and the Timberwolves have come out hot, winning both those games. Denver has been held below 100 points in both those games. Jamal Murray, seemingly, injured, not himself, has not been playing good. Obviously, there's, the whole issue now with the throwing the heating pack on the court, and, a lot of questions about if he'll be suspended for game three. Who knows what they're going to do? Obviously, Jokic, doing all he can, it feels like. But the Timberwolves, I mean, they didn't play game two without Rudy, and it didn't matter at all. But really good defensively. Ant Edwards has just become a superstar. It feels like everyone's favorite player in these playoffs. Like you said, Cat staying out of foul trouble. I mean, your impressions. I know we kind of talked about it in the last episode, and I did ask you, what your thoughts would be after seeing, Minnesota and the way they dominated the Suns. And you were a little wary. You still thought the Nuggets would take care of business. So what do you think the Timberwolves have done that, has resulted in them proving you wrong?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'll say is, I mean, the defense is just like so much better than everyone else in the league. I mean, I guess maybe the Celtics outside of the center position, potentially are similar, but Gobert is, who didn't play last night, is really the only guy that I've seen be able to help on Jokic, effectively and not just give up the Aaron Gordon lob every time. And it sounds simple, but it really is such a big part of the Nuggets offense. And most teams are just left shit out of luck with that. And they're not. So that's a big thing that kind of helped them win game one down the stretch. But I mean, I don't know if I can remember three perimeter defenders on the same team as good as, Edwards, McDaniels, and Nickeil Alexander Walker. Like, I mean, Edwards is just scratching the surface of what he's going to be on defense. I mean, first of all, this guy is like 6'5", 230. Like, no one realizes it, but he's built like a freaking tank. Um, like he's almost like the guard, build version of LeBron, just in terms of where it's like
Yeah,
he moves like, your typical point guard or shooting guard or whoever, but he is freaking massive.
yeah,
Um, and, obviously his, footwork and attention to detail on the defensive end has increased a ton now only in his fourth year. He's like 22. Um,
it's
and then
crazy.
McDaniels is so long but so quick. It's just like he's one of the hardest guys to beat off the dribble. And then Nickeil Alexander Walker, who I thought was just, your typical 3-and-D guy off the bench, has like really turned himself into almost, in the mold of a DiVincenzo, where
Yeah,
he's, a great shooter, but he's also a really good defensive piece. And it's like that's a guy who's, always has been valuable, but has become astronomically valuable recently because, if you can make, five threes in a game and do a good job on the other team's best player, like you're gonna get 40 minutes in the playoffs. Like
yeah,
just, watch, DiVincenzo didn't come out in game six. And obviously the Knicks have some depth issues and Thibodeau is, has some trust issues with some of these guys, but it's like if you're a guy who can just be good on the court as a shooter and really help defensively, like it's gonna be hard to take you out. Um, and they don't even need him to really close games because they have a true point guard in Mike Conley who's just like the perfect,
yeah,
relaxing factor. He adds a lot of shooting. He's the best playmaker on this team. He never turns the ball over. Obviously he's the small, old, unathletic guy who you have to go after on defense, but he's not going to make any stupid mistakes, dumb fouls, stuff like that. And then I have to give credit where it's due. I mean, I did not, it's one thing for Cat to be playing at the level he is offensively over, an 8-game stretch. Obviously the playoffs are magnified and it's tougher, but you'd imagine that most NBA players could kind of luck into a good stretch of shooting in the playoffs. But just his engagement on the defensive end, he's been the main Jokic matchup, and then last night he kind of had to flip, into more of a center role with Gobert out. And he's always going to be someone who has 2 stupid fouls a game. It's just who he is. But everything else is really clicking right now. And I honestly thought last year that he was almost like a D'Lo type guy where it's just like he's a good player, but it's just never going to completely click enough for him to be a true, major piece to a contender. But I mean, I think right now it's early enough to say that's just not true. I mean, he's better defensively than I ever thought he'd be right now, and he's been exactly what you want offensively. So yeah, I mean, all this to give as much credit to the Wolves as I can, while still saying like it's not over at all. Um, I mean, yeah, it's really rare that a team loses 2 home games and then goes on to win the series, but I mean, I don't think the Nuggets are really it's not gonna really matter to them. They're just gonna like, and they could also at any point win 4 out of 5 games against the Timberwolves. So I'm not counting him out. I'm not counting Jokic out. I still think he's the best player in the series. I still don't think they ultimately have an answer for him, especially if he says, fuck you guys, I'm shooting 30 times this game. Um, so I still think this series has a lot of way to go, which makes me happy as a fan. Um, yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts on this? And I guess one thing I didn't bring up quickly add is like game one was much more like, okay, the Timberwolves played well and won a close playoff game. Last night was like, are the Nuggets like this? Like, I think this was a good way to put it. It's like it's a game that makes you ask a lot of questions. Like, are the Timberwolves actually the best team in the NBA? Are the Nuggets, is Jokic, is there some question we have to ask about Murray's health? Are the Lakers not as good as we thought? Those types of things. But yeah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts
It
here.
always gets roped back to the
It's
Lakers.
always the Lakers. How does this affect
No,
LeBron's legacy?
they're probably ESPN's probably salivating at the thought of another LeBron and Lakers segment. No, I think the Nuggets are it's an interesting case, and I mean, something from afar that I've kind of wondered all year is just, about their depth. Obviously, we've talked about that starting five is really good, but now that someone like Jamal Murray is out and or not out, but is injured and not playing as strong, they really, need to rely on their bench. And to me, at least, I just don't feel like their bench, like they don't really have that much to offer. And that's where they're feels like they're pivotally missing someone like a Bruce Brown that was so key for them last season. Just another real playmaker to have in that rotation, to take pressure off of Jamal Murray. Because, I'm looking at the box score yesterday. It's like Justin Holiday's at scoring 13 points. Like Justin Holiday, like sure he's a fine player, but it's like that's not a guy, in my opinion, that, on a championship team is coming off the bench as your leading minute getter. Like that's a little worrisome for me. And obviously, Jokic only 16 points yesterday. Like, I mean, the defense of this Timberwolves team is just insane. Like they are just so aggressive. Just they did this all without Rudy yesterday too, and it's like, I mean, I know people then are going to go, well, obviously Rudy Gobert is one of the most hated players in the league, I think, at this point, and people will point to this and go, oh, they're better without Rudy Gobert, and it's like, no, this was just a case of guys stepping up and making plays, and um, you know, I mean, the fact that they won this game without Rudy Gobert is just ridiculous. I mean, it's they're just so good defensively, like you said. Like, and we haven't even talked. You mentioned Alexander Walker, Edwards, and Jaden McDaniels is right in the mix as a great player. They've just got guys that can do it. Kyle Anderson is another veteran. Like this team is just it's crazy how just quickly they've kind of come together. And thinking back to a few years ago when they traded for Gobert, traded all those picks. Everyone it feels like clown them and made fun of what they're doing. And now it's like, well, shoot, like this team is, if they beat the Nuggets, it's like this is probably the team to beat in the Western Conference. And I mean, Ant Edwards, you can't say enough about him. Like this guy is, you know, the hype is around him. I know people have really kind of gone crazy with the MJ comparisons, which I think is a little unfair to him, just because, he is a special player, but comparing someone to MJ at 22 when they haven't won a championship or MVP is just like, all right, like let's pump the brakes. Like you really, I think, need to win a championship or two and maybe an MVP to kind of get in that talk of, this guy resembles MJ. But, he's incredibly talented. And I think, absolutely is in the running for face of the NBA. And, we've kind of seen that these playoffs is it's kind of the passing of the torch almost. And Ian Edwards, I think, has kind of jumped to the front of that. And it's been really fun to watch. I mean, this Minnesota team, I think it's hard not to like them. I mean, I know maybe people have their gripes with Rudy, but even like Cat, he's just kind of a goofy, funny guy. And I really enjoy watching this Minnesota team. I will say the series is not over. Like the Nuggets, I think are going to come out and I think they're going to win game three personally. I feel like this team is just too good to not do that. But again, Jamal Murray, such a key piece for them. If he's not playing 100% and is not shooting the ball well, like this team probably is not going to win this series at the end of the day. Like they are really good, but Jokic, I don't think is good enough to get it all done by himself per se in this series. So, it's going to be really interesting. I've enjoyed this series and the Timberwolves. I mean, they're 6-0 now in the playoffs against the Suns and the Nuggets. I mean, this team is clicking at the right time, and it just feels like they've just kind of chemistry is something that I think really plays a factor. You see with the Knicks so far in the playoffs, and I feel like the Timberwolves are the next best example where it just feels like all these guys are best friends. They love each other. They know how to play with each other, and it's really working out. And I think they've got a little bit of everything on that team, whether it's leadership, veteran star power, great defensive ability. Like it feels like they just have everything that you need on a championship team. And it's going to be fun seeing kind of where they end up getting to in these playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. Quickly on Ant before we move on.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I do think at a certain point he will become, a little less liked.
Yeah.
Especially if the Timberwolves don't win a championship this year. I think
It always happens with
it
them.
always happens. It's nothing for or against Ant. It's just how it goes. Um, but also like you said with the GOAT thing, like you look at like LeBron, who it's like, he's no worse, in anyone's mind who knows anything about basketball than the second greatest player of all time. And you can even still see with him how the expectations have almost not tainted his career, but followed his career.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, year 21, there should be no expectations. And part of it is just how good he's been, I guess. But like you can see how the expectations have followed LeBron throughout his career. And like he has just barely managed to live up to them as a no question.
Crazy.
Like, right? I mean, it's just like I love Ant, but even if he becomes a top 10 player of all time, he's not going to be as good as Jordan. So it's like,
Yeah.
why? I mean, I know most people are doing it because they like him and they want to, want people to see him highly, but ultimately it is probably destructive for him.
Oh yeah, totally. I
Um,
think it'll be also real quick. I think it'll be one of those things where it's like the second he starts to get, not saying he's gonna get to MJ, but any a little close inch up. Oh, he's not better than MJ. What are we talking about? Like Michael Jordan's the GOAT. I mean, it's just like it's just funny. It's funny seeing like the types of players that really get like the some people worked up about, and it's I can already see it. It's like let's say Ant wins two chips and an MVP. People are oh, this guy's not Michael Jordan. What are we talking about here? Like he lost in the playoffs his first year, and just some like stupid shit like that.
no, I mean, yeah, you're exactly right there. I mean, yeah, the expectation game yeah, it's definitely a big disease in the basketball community. Um, um, yeah, but I mean, yeah, do you want to move on to
Yeah,
Mavs Thunder? Yeah, I mean, we don't have to talk about the series themselves too individually. I mean, I think it's an interesting offseason for both the Pelicans and Clippers.
yeah,
I almost think it's too early to say what's going to happen with the Pelicans, but I'd expect some pretty big moves. Um, and similar with the Clippers, but the one question I'm asking is what's the rest of Kawhi's career going to look like?
yeah.
Because I mean, no one doubts that he's a superstar when he's on the court, but like legitimately, can the guy stay healthy for a playoff run? Um, yeah, I mean, I'm just curious about that. They just signed him to a 3-year max deal. Harden is a free agent. He shockingly, put up, absolute stinkers in the last 2 games of this series. I watched it on my team. I've watched it on other teams. There is nothing quite like a game 5 and game 6 James Harden under bet. I must say that. But I mean, I would expect him to go back to the Clippers, but with the way Harden's career has gone, it wouldn't shock me if he starts hearing some of the criticism going his way and he's like, I want to go play for someone else now. And of course, Paul George is a free agent, like we talked about. So they have a lot of questions on top of, obviously the basketball didn't go perfectly. And yeah, like I said with the Pelicans, I expect changes. I don't know exactly what they'll be besides Zion is going to stay. Herb Jones will stay, Trey Murphy will stay. Every single other person might be on a different team next year. I think with the Mavs, I mean, on one hand, it was kind of ugly. You maybe should have beaten the Clippers in 6 if they had a fully healthy Kawhi as it was. But you also had just such an out of character bad shooting series from Luka that you still won. I mean, I think I still haven't really lowered my thoughts on the Mavs, to be honest. I think Luka is gonna have a typical Luka series now. Especially with some time off to deal with that injury. And I think the supporting cast showed why they're definitely legit. I mean, Kyrie looks like an awesome second option. We've seen it before. We've seen it not go well before, so it
Yeah.
could turn at some point. But as of right now, Kyrie's playing great basketball and, is obviously still one of the, probably 5 to 10 most gifted offensive players in the league. Um, you know, and they have good role players. The center play has been great. Losing Maxi Kleber doesn't help, as your other big body option who can maybe stretch the floor, switch a little bit better. But ultimately with the trades they've made, it kind of prevents them from needing, a guy like that so much. And, in theory, if you can have a guy you're not paying that much be such a big part of your team, it's great. But then if that guy's not there, you're kind of screwed. And in the past, that's been the case with the Mavs, where it's like they lose this kind of random role player and they're screwed. And, I think Kleber is a great player. I've talked about this for way too long. But my point is the Mavs have built the depth to where they're not, completely screwed after one, one major injury to a not super relevant player. Um, so I think this is going to be a great series. I think the Thunder showed that all the questions about them in the playoffs that aren't really about actual X's and O's,
Yeah.
aka experience. I don't really want to hear it. Like, I don't know. It's weird because at the same time, I do genuinely believe teams have to take their lumps in the playoffs before they really get to that level. But I also don't think it would be crazy if the Thunder end up making the finals or even winning the
That would be
championship.
crazy. I don't know.
It would be crazy, but just from a pure like, is this team good enough at
Yeah,
basketball?
yeah,
I do think it's they're good enough, but it would be crazy. Like you're saying, this is a team that hasn't most of these guys have never made the playoffs. Most of them are on their rookie contract, stuff like that. But um, I do think this team is very legit. I think this is going to be an awesome series. OKC and Dallas are pretty awesome crowds. I love the thing about the small markets in the NBA is these fan bases really do show up.
Mhm.
Pacers, Bucks, and I guess we can talk about that series very quickly as well. But all these small market teams, even the Timberwolves, not the smallest market, but it seems like they show up and really care and support their teams, which is
Yeah.
just good to see. Um, and yeah, I mean, this series hasn't started. It feels like it's been like a week since we've seen both of them play.
Oh.
Especially the Thunder. It actually probably has been a week since
Yeah,
they've
it's been
played.
over a week, I think.
Yeah. But I think that almost just makes the series even more likely to be just great basketball, like I keep saying. But I'll lean Mavs in 7. I think they have the best player in this series. And maybe the better second option, but I think SGA and J-Dub will have a great series. I think Chet is gonna, you know, cause some matchup issues. I think I've talked about it before, but Giddey is kind of the big pressure point here, where sometimes he's this great connective playmaker piece. He's a big body on defense, really helps you out on the glass, but allows you to still kind of play your small, playmaking style like you like. But then sometimes it's like he's a complete non-shooter. He's not really good on defense. He's not a big body who can really, bang with the big guys down low. So it's like that's going to be a big pressure point. I expect Daniel Gafford to start on him and PJ Washington to start on Chet Holmgren. Um, we might even get some very weird Luka on Chet Holmgren minutes. Would be my spicy prediction. Not even spicy. Like I just think, the Mavs are saying we gotta put our big guys on the non-shooters. We have to, treat Chet almost as a wing at this point in his career, because he's too dangerous of a threat from behind the line and not strong enough to quite punish, a wing like a Luka.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, I think this is going to be a great series. I wonder exactly how the bench minutes turn out for the Thunder. They're almost too deep for their own good to where it's like I've got, five guys that I'd be comfortable playing 20 minutes off the bench if I had to, but like which of those guys am I playing more? And then it almost becomes like they're all playing like 6 minutes and can't make a huge impact. So I think that'll be a question. Um, but honestly, especially with the Nuggets, looking in a tough spot right now, any of these teams in the West can go win the West, and I think they can all win the championship.
Yeah.
Um, maybe the Mavs don't have quite the defensive personnel for the Celtics or whatever it may be, but I think theoretically it's all possible. And flipping back to the East quickly, like obviously the Bucks got super unlucky with the injury stuff. Giannis, I think once the more we learned about the injury, the worse it kind of seemed. So I wouldn't say I was surprised he didn't end up playing, but it is definitely, a serious injury if Giannis is going to sit out an entire
Yeah.
playoff series. And it clearly is going to impact you if Giannis is going to sit out an entire playoff series. Um, so I don't blame them for losing, but at the same time, I really question how this team gets to even a second round competitive series because I mean Middleton is old, Lopez is old, Lillard is old. Pat Bev, who is an absolute menace, is old. And first of all, you cannot be in the league for 15 years and still do that, Pat. Um, I mean, I really rarely like actually am like, what a jerk move by that NBA player. What a bad guy. But like throwing a ball at a woman in the stands, like really, man? Like I just I like Pat Bev on the Sixers, but I just think the shtick has gone a
Yeah.
little far right now. But besides that, I'm just worried about how this team even stays at the level they're at, which has a lot of questions as it is. They have no money. They have no draft picks to really improve this team. I don't know exactly what their path is here, besides they have a great Giannis and Dame postseason, and everyone else, does fills in the rest. So, and shout out to the Pacers, by the way. Once Halliburton, is healthy next year, I think they're going to be legit. However, I just don't know if they quite have, I mean, they obviously got dominated last night on the glass, but I don't know if we've seen a game yet where it's just like they can't get a rebound on the Knicks, and I think that might happen at some point. And
Yeah.
I'm just worried about how that goes for them. Um, and I kind of touched on Celtics Cavs. I think Mitchell would have to really dominate this series for it to go further than five. I mean, they beat the Celtics without Mitchell in a pretty weird regular season
That was
game.
a crazy game.
That was a crazy game. I mean, I guess maybe try to get some of that magic. Maybe Jared Allen is healthy, but the Cavs have a lot of issues. I mean, ultimately, when you go to 7 against a Magic team, you're probably not going to be able to compete with the Celtics, unless you play much better. And I don't know exactly what that path is besides, Mobley taking a massive jump offensively between the first and second round, or Garland getting his rhythm back. And I just don't know if either of those things are likely to happen. So my point is, I think the East will likely end up being Knicks Celtics, and probably the Celtics just based off talent and the fact that the Knicks are already, you know, pushing so hard just to get there.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if the Knicks do make that more, close than people would think. But ultimately, the West here, like I could really see any of the four teams getting out here. Obviously, I think the Nuggets are the best team on paper, but they're down 2-0, just lost two straight home games, and their second best player, for a lot of reasons, doesn't look like himself. So,
Yeah.
I mean, the West is going to be very interesting. I think the Porzingis health, again, I keep saying it, and hopefully I look like an idiot for saying this. I don't think it ends up mattering whether he's himself or plays against the Cavs.
Yeah.
I just don't think the Celtics should lose to the Cavs as is. Um, but you get to a Knicks series, and I think that's really where you start to need Porzingis. And certainly, he'll probably be playing at that point, but will he be, the Porzingis he's been all year would be my question. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, this has been an awesome playoffs, but the refs have really been an issue. We talked about this last night, just texting each other, and it's like, just feels like there's just not consistency.
Yeah.
Sometimes they want to, do the let them play, it's the playoffs thing. And then, it seems like they'll go for a few minute stretch where they're calling everything. And it's like, you saw Ant get that technical in game one for literally nothing, like literally staring at a guy. And you saw Michael Malone try to like kill a ref last night, and he didn't get a technical. And it's like, I actually don't, I love the restraint shown by that ref, but you have to have more of a plan in terms of what constitutes a technical, what constitutes a shooting foul, what constitutes a review for a flagrant foul. All this stuff just feels like they're just kind of going off whatever they want. And it's just been a major issue. We saw the missed kicked ball last night. We saw, the moving screen, which they never ever call in any point of the game,
Yeah. That
get
was
called in the
crazy.
last 15 seconds. It's like, yeah, I get why people are mad. And I don't know exactly what the solution is, but I think that's the biggest, thing on the NBA's hands this offseason, so to speak.
Yeah.
I've talked so much this episode. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the Knicks series, how you think the Mavs Thunder is going to go, everything really.
Yeah. No, the officiating, like you said, I mean, it's definitely been you know, all over the place. I mean, I think that's just kind of happens in tough sports to officiate, like the NFL and the NBA. I think, baseball's, there's some complaints, but it's a lot easier. I feel like to ref baseball than or ump baseball than NBA and NFL are just so quick pace and it's
I
tough.
think the NFL sorry, the NBA is way harder than any other league
Yeah.
because it's just like every second,
There's just
bang bang
contact
plays
all
are
over the
happening.
place. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's just a mess and it's tough. I mean, I think people give refs a hard time. It is a really tough job, but regardless, I mean, it is their job, so they should be doing better. Um, I'll start with the Knicks. I think, last night was a really good game. The Pacers, they probably should have won that game in hindsight, not just because the refs, they were in control for a while
Mhm.
and they kind of made some bad passes down the stretch. There was, I think, one inbound or I think maybe that was the Philly series. Honestly, it's all a blur at this point. But there was just so many costly mistakes. It felt like from them late in that game, and the Knicks seemingly didn't miss a shot. And um, you know, the moving screen was obviously a killer. And um, they're a good team, like you said. Halliburton just is not playing like himself, and it's like if he can't go, 100%, like they're not going to win the series at the end of the day. I think the Knicks have just proven, how hard they play and how bad they want it. And Jalen Brunson, like we talked about him earlier, but just an absolute superstar in every stretch of the imagination. I mean, that contract is just an absolute bargain, and he's someone who, if he keeps playing the way he does, very well may, have his number retired as a Knick. I mean, he's been a beast, and it's going to be really interesting. I doubted this Knicks team. I kind of bought into the idea that, they didn't really have the superstars, and you watch them in the playoffs, and it's like they've got the guys to, get it at least to the Eastern Conference Finals. I don't know if they can beat the Celtics, like you said. I just think the Celtics are just like different, man. It's like these guys, the fact that you've got Tatum, Jalen Brown, Drew Holiday, Derek White, Porzingis when he's healthy, like all these guys, it's just like it's almost unfathomable. I mean, I don't the cap situation doesn't even make sense how that's possible. So, to summarize the Knicks, I think they'll win the series. I would say 6 games, 5 or 6 games. I don't think they'll really have too much trouble, although last night was a close one. But I think as the Sixers learned, like at MSG, if you have a game within reach, like you gotta get it. And if once you lose that opportunity, it's just a death wish and a kind of death note, I guess, is what I mean. Moving along, Thunder Clippers. It's a really interesting series, and the Thunder, regardless of what happens, I mean, this team is set up to just feast for years and years and years. I mean, they are, Sam Presti literally should have a statue built just for the way he's assembled the roster. I mean, it's incredible. Um, you know, I think the Mavs, like you said, Luca is really due for a good series. Kyrie has been sensational. I think is really, this guy was the most hated player in the league, and it feels like everyone loves him again and is all back in it. It's kind of crazy how some of these things just turn. And I think Dallas, a lot of people were skeptical about that fit last year. They didn't really play amazing down the stretch, and I think it's just been a really good spot for him where he doesn't have that media attention that he had in New York that was following him all the time. Obviously, a lot of that stuff, COVID was going on, and obviously he had his beliefs on everything with that. And I think it just, being in New York at that time, I think it just made it terrible. I think in Dallas, he's kind of been able to just be himself, be to himself, and he's played really well next to Luca and has shown up in the playoffs. And I mean, people forget just how good this guy was and still is. And that duo, I just think it might be too much for the Thunder to stop at the end of the day. It's going to be interesting. The Thunder got the guys, Chet, J-Dub, Shea's been incredible, obviously. But I would lean Mavericks, but at the same time, I can see the Thunder winning this series. I think it'll be, I think for the Mavericks, this is the type of series where the experience will come into play versus the Thunder. That first series for the Thunder really didn't matter. This is a series where, the Mavericks are coming off a series where, it went 6 games. It was competitive. They won game 6, in the opposing team's venue. I believe they won game 6 in LA, right? Not that, that place is super hostile or anything. Um, but, they've got that experience. Kyrie's obviously won a championship. Luka's been in the playoffs a lot. And, it's going to be interesting to see how the Thunder respond when they get punched in the mouth, because that's going to happen this series. Luka's going to go for 50 or Kyrie's going to go for 35. And, they're not gonna sweep the Mavericks at the end of the day. So it's gonna be interesting to see how they respond, to struggles, to some adversity in the playoffs. I think if Dallas wins game 1, they're gonna be in a really good spot for this series. I would start to get concerned if it goes 2-0 to the Thunder. I think as long as Dallas grabs one of the first 2, they'll win in 6 or 7 games, kind of like what you said. So that's my prediction for that. And then the last series, my Cavaliers, fighting until the death in game 7. I mean, I think this team right now, Jared Allen's banged up, obviously didn't play the last few games. Who knows what's going to happen in this series? Garland, I mean, this guy has been playing like trash. I mean, there's no other way to put it. Like, he did show up for a good 5-6 minutes in game 7, which if he didn't play, as strong as he did in those minutes, they might not win that game. Um, it's all Donovan Mitchell though, and he's a little banged up himself, but he's found a way. He looked really good in the last few games of this series. Evan, Donovan Mitchell, like this is a guy who can change a game. He's led the Cavs all year. You know, when they were on that run during the stretch of the year, he was, sensational. That's the key. They got to lean on him, but also, they're gonna need their guys to show up. This Celtics team is legit. Darius Garland is going to have to play good in this series for them to win at the end of the day. Evan Mobley is going to have to be really good on the defensive end and even the offensive end, which, his scoring ability, he's a decent scorer, but he's struggled a lot. And you see that in the games. I think Jared Allen being back would be huge, but at the end of the day, this is also going to be one of those series where the role players are going to have to step up. Max Strus, a guy who they brought in the offseason for, big moments like this. Karis LeVert, a guy who, a solid piece for them and has shown up at times. Isaac Okoro, they might even need, Sam Merrill to hit a few threes like he did in game 7 to get the offense going. Or Niang really struggled in that Magic series. Can he get going? Like, they're going to need these guys to step up. And, each game is kind of going to have to be, one of these guys that steps up and gets the job done. And, I think the biggest factor in the series to me is if the Cavs are going to have a chance is Darius Garland. He's got to play good. He's got to be a consistent scorer for them. If this guy is shooting like crap, the Cavs are probably going to get swept or lose in 5 games. Um, so, I mean, my prediction would be Celtics in 5 or 6. 6 was probably generous. I just think they're too tough to stop. But game one, man, game one, if the Cavs can somehow come out and win game one, it would be a huge, huge tone setter for the series. They haven't lost at home yet, obviously against the Magic, but you know, they've defended home court. If they go out and win game one, it sets the tone for the series. So, I think game one will say it all. If the Cavs have a remote chance of winning this series, if they lose by 20, 25 points, which very well will happen, you can kiss the series goodbye. You may as well throw it on NBA TV or, throw it on the Food Network for all we care. We won't have to tune in for the rest of the series. So that's my thoughts on that series. Kind of like you said, like I think the Celtics will win the East. I think, it's kind of just, I don't want to say a cakewalk. I think the Knicks will be a tough test, but it's not the competition that we're seeing out in the West where, these teams, I mean, especially like if the Timberwolves advance, like they're going from Suns, who've got so much talent, to the defending champs and the Nuggets, and then either of the Mavericks or the Thunder would be such a tough test. And I mean, you can say the same thing about really any of these teams. Like it is a gauntlet, especially from now moving forward. So no matter what the matchup is, it's going to be really fun to watch. I'm excited to watch. And yeah, I mean the NBA, it's this is what it needed. I think this regular season outside of, the in-season tournament was just really rough with some of the, kind of level of play. And I think there was a lot of disinterest from the general public, kind of like where I would put myself into relating to the NBA. And, I think the playoffs have kind of shown what the league can be and is at the highest level. It's just a kind of, a shame that the regular season really isn't like that, but understandably so. I mean, it is a big toll on the bodies, and you want to save and be healthy for the playoffs. So it's just good to see, because it's not, basketball is a great game. You see it with college, everyone loves. No one says a bad thing about college basketball because of how competitive it is and as great it is. And now the NBA, I feel like he's getting that deserved shine that, I feel like it needed after, kind of, at least in my opinion, a little bit of a slow regular season. So it's
No,
been fun to
definitely.
watch.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just a few things quickly. Cavs, I'm very interested, especially if Jared Allen is starting and playing game one. I mean, certainly he'll be starting if he's playing. But
Tristan
where
Thompson
exact
in the lineup.
yeah, Tristan. Like, I just wonder, like, where does Mobley start? And then who, maybe he's, I guess the best matchup is maybe like Tatum, you know, but well, it sounds crazy, but then if you don't do that, you're gonna have to put
Like
either like
Spruce.
Spruce or Donovan Mitchell on him. So it's like I don't know. And usually when you look at a matchup and you're like, well, I don't know, if this guy is gonna be able to guard this guy, usually it ends up mattering a little less than you think. But in this case, I'm like, man, like what do you even do? Like, and
Yeah.
then of course, you'd expect a Coro to get a lot of minutes, and that's probably your best answer, but the Celtics are going to dare Okoro to shoot. I will guarantee you
Oh yeah.
that. So, he's going to have to make his shots. Levert might end up, being a guy that almost ends up out, getting more minutes than Darius Garland because he can do a lot of the, secondary shot creation that Garland does. And frankly, hasn't been much worse at it recently. Um, and he's a 6'5", 6'6" wing with a long wingspan who's really committed to defense. So I think your best lineup might end up being, him and Mitchell with Strus or whatever it may be. But I think he and Okoro are going to be big pieces defensively, especially. But like you said, yeah, the Celtics have no excuse not to really run through this series and probably the East as a whole. Um, and yeah, with the regular season and the narratives and all this, I think the NBA has almost soured on the fans who aren't, 100% committed to watching, 90% of their team's games and watching, a game or two other than that most nights, whatever it may be. Like outside of that, like most of what the NBA has going on just is like it ends up becoming like a conversation about, should they change a rule or is this unfair? Is this rigged? We've had a lot of betting stuff, and obviously that's been a big thing in other sports as well. But like there's just a lot about basketball that isn't about basketball, kind of in a way.
Yeah.
And it's really frustrating because, like you said, with March Madness, and I think almost only soccer is like this, where it's both aesthetically pleasing to watch. The ball moves around quickly. These guys are such great shot makers, but I love football and hockey so much. I've gotten really into hockey this postseason the last couple of years, but ultimately it's much harder to understand exactly what's going on. It's hard to follow the puck and all the rules in hockey, and I'm still learning for sure. And football is its own separate mess. Like, I mean, I don't even know how you can really learn football if you haven't been watching it from a young age. I mean, truthfully, like so many different rules and complexities. But yeah, basketball is so much simpler, and like you said, everyone seems to love March Madness. So if the NBA can really figure out some type of middle ground between having a regular season that matters, but not making it so that the playoffs are in some way devalued, I really think that's a big thing, like you said. So, yeah, I mean, I think I will say this: I think like the hate circle that I kind of touched on with Edwards, and like seems to sort of be happening with Shea, where it's like last year everyone was like, wow, this guy's so good, so cool, and then it seems like all the discourse about him this year is that he's a flopper and a free throw merchant and all this stuff. And like, truthfully, I don't think I've ever seen Shea like do what people complain about, which is like the foul bait stuff. And frankly, I don't care either way, but I don't think Shea does it at all. I just think he's hard to guard, and that's why he shoots so many free throws. But um, yeah, I think the NBA is a very narrative driven league, as I'm saying, where it's just about what people are talking about more than the game itself, and that ends up taking away from the product a lot of times. Um, but in a way, it's almost like a reality show where everyone's like, "Oh, where's this guy gonna go?" It's all about the drama. So it's very interesting how the NBA is like that, almost in a way that no other league is like. But yeah, I'm very excited for these next rounds of playoffs. Yeah, I mean, are you ready to wrap up?
Yeah, you can wrap up.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, this is a good episode. I'm sure we'll be talking more basketball next week. Baseball, like we said, like I don't actually this was off air, but it's hard to really get too much to talk about baseball early May,
We
just
have
because,
so much that's so long to talk about baseball. There's no
yeah.
need to think about it now.
Yeah, I mean, and on top of that, and any of these teams, my Phillies have the best record in the MLB right now, I believe, and that could be completely different in 2 weeks. So, not a huge point to talking about everything going on there, but as the season goes on, we'll be talking more and more about baseball. Obviously, the football preseason and stuff like that will be heating up over the summer. Yeah, I mean, for now, it'll be a lot of basketball, I'd imagine, over the next coming weeks. But yeah, I mean, this is really the prime time of basketball. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to like and subscribe, and that'll do it for this week on Outside the Arena.